Lieutenant Vex Ulthar stood on the metal platform of the observation deck, staring out into the infinite void of the Xenorian front lines, or as he liked to call it, the armpit of the universe. Not that he'd ever admit it aloud, but the silence of space made him uneasy. It was the kind of quiet that whispered ominous threats right into your ear, like a lover who's seen your browser history. The deck was populated by a scant few officers, all absorbed in their own disillusionment. They wore uniforms as stiff as their expressions, eyes glazed over like pastries. Vex idly scratched at the insignia on his chest, a gaudy reminder of the Empire's supposed superiority. The Xenorian Empire, proud of its vastness, its power, and its ability to ignore warning signs as well as a mother dismissing her child's imaginary friends. "You look thrilled," a voice interrupted his brooding. It was Zala, an engineer whose sarcasm was sharp enough to cut through titanium. She leaned against the railing beside him, her hands jammed into the pockets of her jumpsuit, the epitome of "I don't give a damn" chic. "Thrilled doesn't quite cover it," Vex replied, eyes still fixed on the abyss. "More like ecstatic that we're stuck here watching nothing happen." Zala chuckled, a sound that echoed like a malfunctioning synthesizer. "Ah, the glorious duty of Empire service, babysitting the black. You know, if you squint hard enough, you might see something interesting, like your impending existential crisis." Huh. Funny, Vex shook his head. Last week's patrol saw some unidentified blip out near the edge of Sector 7. More space debris, or maybe it was a stray thought from the High Command. Would explain a lot, Vex snorted. But no, the intel said it was moving, actually moving. Zala raised an eyebrow. "And they didn't bother mentioning this on the morning holo bulletin. Nah, not worth interrupting the usual propaganda drivel. Besides, it's just some human tech. Apparently Earth's got nanotech scouts nosing around." She scoffed. "Humans? Really? Isn't that like worrying about termites when your spaceship's on fire? Tell that to Dr. Finn Callan," Vex muttered, nodding toward the lab section of the deck where a figure was hunched over a console, furiously typing. "Earth's latest mascot, and he's convinced they're up to something. What's he doing here anyway? Shouldn't he be on a beach somewhere with the other humans, sipping something toxic out of a coconut?" Vex shrugged. "Maybe he got sick of sand in his shoes. Or maybe he's just here to annoy the living hell out of us." As if on cue, Dr. Callan straightened up, turning to face them. He had the kind of face that suggested he spent too much time thinking about things people would rather ignore. A mop of unruly hair sat atop his head as if it had given up years ago. "Ah, Lieutenant Ulthar," Callan called, waving a hand as though trying to get the attention of a disinterested cat. "Got a moment? As if I have anything better to do." Vex sighed and pushed himself off the railing. Zala shot him an amused look. "Enjoy the intellectual enlightenment." Vex approached Callan, who was already gesturing enthusiastically at his console. "I've been analyzing the nanotech readings we intercepted," he said, eyes alight with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners. "And I think there's much more at play here than the Empire realizes." "Look, Doc," Vex began, already feeling a headache brewing, "the Empire doesn't care about a few specks of dust buzzing around. Unless they're blowing up planets, they're considered a minor nuisance." Callan's grin widened, the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who's about to say something you won't like. "And that's exactly why it's brilliant. The perfect cover, don't you see? Nanotech is harmless until it's not. They're adapting, learning." "Sounds like my last relationship," Vex muttered. "Adapting, learning, plotting my demise." "I'm serious," Callan insisted. "These things can infiltrate infrastructure, sabotage systems, maybe even brainwash personnel." "You seem awfully cheery about doomsday," Vex noted, eyeing the console as if it might explode. "Let's just say I appreciate the irony," Callan replied, feigning a thoughtful pose. "Empires fall not with a bang, but with a tiny, almost unnoticeable whimper, and a few gigabytes of corrupted data. And you're here because I'm the only one who seems to think it's worth more than a damn," Callan replied, shrugging. "Plus, I like the snacks." "Of course," Vex muttered. "Snacks." The real motivator of scientific inquiry. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden loud klaxon, a shrieking alarm that was as welcome as a fart in an airlock. The deck burst into a flurry of activity, officers scrambling to stations, faces twisted in various expressions of panic, confusion, and for the particularly seasoned, apathy. "What now?" Vex groaned, pushing past Callan to reach the main console. "Unscheduled energy surge detected," the automated voice intoned, as though it was bored of its own announcements. "Where's it coming from?" Vex demanded. "Sector 7, Zala shouted over the commotion. "Same spot as the blip last week." Vex cursed under his breath. "Humans? Why did it have to be humans?" Callan, apparently unfazed, leaned over Vex's shoulder. "Told you," he said with the kind of smugness only a scientist with a hypothesis could muster. Yeah, shut up," Vex grumbled. "All right, people, let's not screw this up." The officers moved with the kind of precision that only came from drilling the same procedures into their heads 1,000 times. Screens flickered, numbers scrolled, and somewhere in the chaos, someone started humming a tune that suspiciously sounded like a funeral march. In the midst of it all, Vex found himself staring at the tactical display, a map of the surrounding space. And there, clear as the day he wished wasn't starting, was the source of their current misery, a small, rapidly approaching blip. "Well, isn't that just perfect?" Zala quipped, taking a seat at her station. "Looks like your nanotech friends have bigger friends." She tapped a few keys, enhancing the image. "Looks like the welcoming committee might be a little bigger than expected," Callan observed. Vex sighed. "Bigger, nastier, and probably loaded with enough firepower to make this station look like a tin can. What's the plan, Lieutenant?" Zala asked, her earlier sarcasm replaced with grim determination. "First we panic," Vex said deadpan. "Then we try not to die," Callan chuckled softly. "Well, I'm glad I'm in safe hands." Vex shot him a glare that could have peeled paint. "You better have a good reason to be so damn chipper." "I do," Callan replied, tapping the side of his head. "I know a guy, Callan repeated, nodding sagely, "who owes me a favor." Vex was about to ask what kind of favor when a voice crackled over the communications channel. "Unidentified vessel, stand down and prepare for inspection." "Oh great, now they want to inspect us," Zala muttered. "What's next? Tea and scones." Vex rubbed his temples. "All right, people, let's do this by the book, and if that fails, we'll improvise." The officers snapped into action, all the wit and sarcasm taking a backseat to the immediate threat. Vex watched as the blip grew larger on the screen, and he couldn't help but think that somewhere out there, the universe was having a good laugh at their expense. But just as he was about to issue another order, Callan, still annoyingly calm, leaned in close. "Hey Vex, what, do you believe in luck?" Callan asked, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Vex snorted. "In this line of work, not for a second." "Well, you might want to reconsider," Callan replied, nodding toward the screen. "Because we're going to need all the luck we can get." And as the unidentified vessel loomed closer, casting a shadow over the deck, Vex couldn't help but agree. Because sometimes in the vast, uncaring expanse of the universe, a little luck was all you had to hold onto. The klaxon wailed on, the deck a hurricane of activity, and amidst it all, Vex could only hold onto the hope that maybe, just maybe, Callan's guy was as good as he claimed. Because if not, things were about to get a whole lot worse. Vex Ulthar wasn't one to lose his cool, even when the universe seemed dead set on throwing lemons at Mach 3. But as the klaxon scream softened to an ominous background drone, he found himself gripping the edge of the console like it might suddenly decide to escape into the ether. "So, Doc, you got a plan or just a smug grin?" Vex asked, eyeing the ever-approaching blip on the screen as though it'd explain itself if he glared hard enough. Callan shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. "Well, plans are overrated, don't you think? But I do have something that might tickle your interest." Vex raised an eyebrow. "It better be more than your charming personality." With a flourish, Callan tapped a few keys on the console, pulling up a series of schematics that looked more like a child's doodle than anything comprehensible. "Behold, Earth's latest in nanotechnological mischief." Zala, who had been listening in while checking her own station, snorted. "What is it, an art project?" "Ah, the sarcasm," Callan said, nodding appreciatively. "But no, this is part of a network we've been quietly deploying. Think of it as a rather pesky mosquito, minuscule, hard to catch, and can really ruin your day." "Didn't know mosquitoes came with a demolition setting," Vex mused. "Adaptability is key," Callan said, and the grin on his face suggested he was enjoying this far too much. "They're designed to learn, evolve, and survive." "Finally," Zala cut in, "something that sounds like an engineer's nightmare and a bureaucrat's wet dream. But why here, why us?" Vex asked, rubbing his temples. "I thought Earthlings had moved past bothering us." Callan leaned in, eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement usually reserved for mad scientists in bad holodramas. "Think of this as a test, and the Empire is the perfect guinea pig." Vex let out a breath. "Great, so were the unfortunate lab rats in this cosmic experiment." "Look, Lieutenant," Callan said, suddenly serious, "the Empire's complacency is its own worst enemy. They underestimate not just us but themselves. This tech could, if they bothered to look over their noses, revolutionize their approach." Before Vex could respond, another voice crackled over the intercom. "Lieutenant Ulthar, report to the command center immediately," he grimaced. "Duty calls." He turned to Callan. "Keep your toys under control, Doc." Zala gave him a mock salute. "Go get him, Tiger." Vex made his way through the bustling corridors, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of burnt coffee. Upon entering the command center, he was greeted by stern faces and a silence that was somehow louder than the klaxons. "Lieutenant," Commander Ferris greeted him, his voice as dry as a desert in a drought. "Care to explain why our sensors are picking up unauthorized tech in our sector?" "Just a little Earthling surprise, sir." Vex replied, the sarcasm dripping like oil from a leaky gasket. Seems they've figured out how to play with nanotech. Ferris' eyes narrowed, a look that could melt steel. And you think this is amusing, Lieutenant? Not at all, sir. But I do think it's worth our attention. These aren't just dust bunnies on a rampage. The commander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The Empire has no time for fairy tales, Ulthar. You're suggesting a threat from a species that's been sidelined for decades. Exactly, sir. Which is why it's brilliant. They've been underestimated, and now they're playing catch-up in a big way. Ferris grunted, a sound that implied he'd rather be facing an Arcturian ice beast than dealing with politics. We'll monitor the situation. But unless it presents an immediate threat, hold position. Understood. Vex resisted the urge to roll his eyes. I'll keep you updated. As he left the room, Vex couldn't help but notice the chorus of low murmurs and skeptical glances exchanged between the other officers. Typical. The Empire's arrogance was as omnipresent as the vacuum of space. Back on deck, Callan was tinkering with his console, the image of a man in his element. So how'd it go? He asked without looking up. Like talking to a brick wall, a very stubborn, very dismissive brick wall. Callan chuckled. Sounds about right. The Empire's got a knack for ignoring problems until they explode in their face. Well, they are in for a hell of a wake-up call if this turns ugly, Vex replied, folding his arms. Zala spun her chair around to face them, a mischievous glint in her eyes. So what's our next move? Sit tight and pray. No, but praying couldn't hurt, Vex said with a wry smile. Callan, do you think your nanotech could play nice with our systems here? Callan scratched his chin. In theory, sure, but in practice, it's like letting a teenager loose in a candy store. Chaos is inevitable. Then we better get the right kind of chaos, Vex decided. We need a backup in case the Empire's arrogance becomes a liability. Callan nodded. I'll see what I can do. Might be a bit of a wild ride, though. Wild rides are our specialty, Zala quipped, flipping a switch with a flourish. The tension on deck was palpable as Callan began interfacing with the system, his fingers dancing over the keys with an almost reckless abandon. Data scrolled across the screens, a blur of numbers and schematics that only made sense to those fluent in technobabble. You know, Zala said, turning to Vex with a grin, if we screw this up, we might end up with a nanotech revolt on our hands. It'd be a hell of a way to go, Vex replied, not entirely joking. Better than getting vaporized by whatever's out there. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one stretching like a rubber band ready to snap. Finally, Callan leaned back with a satisfied sigh. I think we've got something. The nanobots are integrated at least partially. Partially, Vex echoed, eyebrow raised. Think of it as a friendly handshake, Callan explained. They're not smashing the place up, but they're also not rolling out the red carpet. That's reassuring, Zala said dryly. So what's the plan? Vex thought for a moment, weighing their limited options. We keep monitoring, ready for anything. And hope the Empire pulls its head out of its ass before it's too late. Optimistic, Callan remarked, a hint of admiration in his voice. I like that. More like realistic, Vex corrected. Out here, it's survival of the smartest or the luckiest. They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts as the looming threat hung over them like a storm cloud. Then, almost as if on cue, the comms crackled to life again. Lieutenant Ulthar, this is command. We've got movement on the unidentified vessel. Vex's stomach twisted. What kind of movement? Hard to say, came the reply, the voice tinged with underlying concern. It's changing course, heading straight for us. Well, isn't that just dandy? Zala muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. Get ready, Vex ordered, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like gravity gone haywire. Let's hope we're not about to become cosmic debris. The deck buzzed with activity, a well-oiled machine shifting into overdrive. Vex stood at the helm, feeling the gravity of command settle on his shoulders like an unwelcome cloak. Callan, Vex said, voice steady despite the chaos. You got any more tricks up your sleeve? Callan's grin was almost feral. Always, Lieutenant, always. As the vessel approached, casting an ever-growing shadow, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something monumental. The kind of event that history books might gloss over as a footnote while the rest of the universe carried on with its routine madness. Weapons on standby, Zala reported, her voice crisp and professional. Vex nodded, glancing around at his crew, each one a cog in the intricate clockwork of survival. Stay sharp, we've got a storm coming. The moment stretched taut, the air electric with anticipation. Then, without warning, the vessel stopped, hanging in the void like a specter of doom. What's it doing? Vex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Maybe it's just shy, Zala offered, her attempt at humor doing little to ease the tension. They waited, the silence punctuated only by the soft hum of machinery and the distant murmur of command chatter. Every eye was fixed on the screen, watching as the mysterious vessel drifted closer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the comms crackled to life once more, a voice cutting through the static like a knife. Xenorian Station, this is Captain Aras of the Earth vessel Intrepid. We come in peace. Vex blinked, startled by the unexpected civility. Peace, he repeated, the word foreign and absurd in the face of their predicament. Zala arched an eyebrow. Well, that's a twist. Let's see if their definition matches ours, Vex said, a wary hope flickering to life. Callan, standing by with arms crossed and a smug satisfaction, leaned over and whispered, "Told you I knew a guy." Vex couldn't help but chuckle, a sound that was equal parts relief and disbelief. For a moment, the absurdity of it all struck him, trapped between the Empire's ignorance and Earth's audacity, relying on luck and a handful of nanotech to tip the scales. "Well then," Vex said, his voice carrying across the deck, "let's hear what they have to say. And try not to shoot anyone until we've got all the facts." As they prepared to engage with this new player in their interstellar game of chess, Vex realized that the universe might indeed have a twisted sense of humor, one that he, for better or worse, was right in the middle of. And as the conversation unfolded, he couldn't help but think that if they made it out of this alive, he'd owe Callan more than just a drink. Maybe the whole damn bar. Lieutenant Vex Ulthar stood at the helm, staring at the comm screen as Captain Aras's visage flickered into view, 1 part diplomat, 2 parts poker player, and entirely too smug for Vex's liking. The man had that particular earthling quality of being both irritatingly earnest and sarcastically irreverent, like a schoolteacher with just enough vodka to make the day interesting. "Captain Aras," Vex began, keeping his tone as neighborly as he could muster given the circumstances. "I'll be honest, your timing is impeccable. For species we've been ignoring for decades, you sure know how to make an entrance." Aras grinned, his face a study in faux innocence. "It's a gift or a curse, depending on who you ask. You've got a knack for showing up just as the party's about to get good. Well, you've certainly caught the Empire's attention," Vex replied, watching the Earth vessel float in the void like a cat casually observing a mousy hole. "And that usually doesn't bode well for the guest list. Trust me, Lieutenant, we're not here to rain on your parade. In fact, we'd like to help. Seems we've got a few tricks up our sleeves that could benefit both parties." Vex exchanged a glance with Zala, who was doing her best to appear unimpressed while also clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Help, you say, and what's the catch?" "No catch, unless you're allergic to successful outcomes," Aras replied, with a wink so pronounced Vex feared the man might pull something. "Our nanotech has got a bit of a mind of its own, and it's eager to play. We figure a little collaboration might do us all some good." At that moment, Callan leaned in, whispering with the conspiratorial glee of a kid revealing where he'd hidden the fireworks. "Vex, we should hear them out. Their tech has got potential, and frankly, the Empire could use a lesson in humility." Vex nodded. "All right, Captain. You've got my attention. What exactly are you proposing?" Aras leaned back in his seat, radiating the kind of calm that only came from someone who wasn't the one about to get shot at. "We integrate our nanotech into your systems. It'll enhance your capabilities and give us some interesting data on how the Empire reacts. Win-win. And if things go sideways?" Vex asked, because they always did. Zala snorted, folding her arms. "If, Vex, by now you should know it's not a matter of if but when." "Point taken," Vex conceded. "So, Captain, if this does go pear-shaped, what's your plan?" Aras's smile widened, the kind that implied he was either a mad genius or just mad. "We improvise. After all, that's where the real fun starts." "Improvise," Vex repeated, deadpan. "Lovely. Just what I needed to hear. We're in," Callan said before Vex could protest further, his fingers already dancing over his console. "Besides, if we're going down, might as well go down in a blaze of glory." "That's the spirit," Zala added, her grin matching Callan's in reckless enthusiasm. "Let's give the Empire a proper show." Vex sighed, the kind that spoke volumes about the weight of leadership and the futility of trying to stop a runaway train. "All right, Captain Aras, you've got a deal. But remember, if this blows up in our faces, I'll make sure you're the first one to hear about it." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Aras replied, his voice smooth as silk over static. "Let's get to work." With that, the channel closed, leaving Vex with a crew ready to do the kind of reckless improvisation that only happened when you mixed desperation with just enough optimism to be dangerous. He turned to Callan, who was eagerly interfacing with the console like a kid in a candy store, except this candy was made of nanobots and military-grade technology. "Callan, you sure you can handle this?" Vex asked, his voice laced with the kind of doubt that only came from years of watching plans go sideways. "Relax, Vex," Callan replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I've got this. Besides, the Empire needs a reminder that they're not the only players in this game. Just make sure they remember it without taking us out in the process," Vex muttered, not entirely convinced. "Zala, keep an eye on our comms. I want to know the second anything shifts." "Roger that, Lieutenant," she replied, already tapping commands into her console with the precision of someone who'd been in the game long enough to know exactly when things were about to hit the proverbial fan. As Callan worked, Vex watched the screen, the creeping sense of unease gnawing at him like a parasite with an insatiable appetite. The Empire, for all its pomp and circumstance, was not the kind to take interference lightly. He knew that this gamble could end in disaster, but then again, wasn't that the whole point of a good gamble? High stakes, low odds, and just a sliver of hope. "Lieutenant," Zala called, pulling his attention from the screen. "Empire's initiated some countermeasures. Looks like they're trying to swat us like a fly." "Perfect," Vex replied, the sarcasm thick enough to be cut with a knife. "Callan, can your nanotech handle a little pressure?" Callan's grin was as reckless as ever. "It's designed for this. Let's see how they like playing against something that learns as it goes." The air on deck became charged, a tangible tension that seemed to cling to the skin and twist in the stomach. As Callan's nanotech began to integrate, the Empire's defenses sparked into action, attempting to isolate and obliterate the unauthorized technology with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Empire's throwing everything at us," Zala reported, her voice rising above the din of alarms and the hum of the ship. "They're not pulling any punches." "Good," Vex said, his mind already racing through possible contingencies. "Let's see if they can keep up." The battle of tech verses might played out on the screens, a dizzying dance of data and power, each side probing for weakness and exploiting every advantage. The Empire's systems lashed out with the kind of brute force they were famous for, a cascading assault of firewalls, data wipes, and tactical redeployments. But Callan's nanotech was something different, something Earth had perfected in the shadows while the rest of the galaxy scoffed. It adapted, evolved, and learned from every encounter like a virus with a grudge. "Nanotech is breaking through," Callan announced, his voice a mix of triumph and scientific wonder. "It's like watching art in motion, pure chaotic art." "Don't get too comfortable," Vex warned, though a smile tugged at his lips. "It's not over yet." As the minutes ticked by, the Empire's frustration became palpable, a slow-building fury that manifested in increasingly erratic attempts to shut down the invasion. Vex could almost picture the high-ranking officials on the other side, fuming and frantic, their perfect little world unraveling thread by thread. "Looks like they're having a rough day," Zala remarked, her tone more amused than sympathetic. "Wonder how their PR department's gonna spin this one." "Probably blame it on the weather," Vex replied, enjoying the irony. "When all else fails, it's the universe's fault." The battle continued, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse where neither side was willing to back down. Callan's nanotech, now fully integrated, began to push back, altering protocols and rerouting systems with an efficiency that bordered on ruthless. "Empire's systems are buckling," Zala reported, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "I think we're actually doing this." Vex nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "Keep the pressure on." "We're not out of the woods yet." As the Empire's defenses faltered, the station began to shift, trembling under the strain of its own systems rebelling against it. Vex felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that came with the knowledge that they were on the brink of something monumental. "Hold steady, everyone," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "This is where it counts." The next few moments stretched out, a heartbeat suspended in time. Then, with a suddenness that caught even Vex by surprise, the Empire's systems crumbled, the last vestiges of resistance collapsing under the weight of Earth's relentless innovation. "We did it," Callan declared, a note of triumph in his voice that Vex hadn't heard in years. "The nanotech is in control. Now let's see if we can keep it that way," Vex replied, his mind already turning to the next challenge. "Zala, what's our status with the Empire?" "They're trying to regroup," Zala said, her eyes scanning the data feeds with the practiced ease of someone who'd been through the ringer more times than she cared to admit. "But it'll take them a while to recover from this hit." "Good," Vex replied, feeling the tension begin to ease. "Let's make the most of it. Callan, keep the nanotech stable. We don't want it getting ideas." "You got it, boss," Callan replied, his fingers a blur as he worked to maintain control over the newly integrated systems. As the dust began to settle, Vex allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd done the impossible, outmaneuvered an empire, and survived to tell the tale. But as always, the universe had a way of keeping things interesting. "Lieutenant Ulthar," Araz's voice crackled over the comm, a mixture of respect and mild annoyance. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to pull that off. Seems I underestimated you." Vex smirked, the taste of victory sweet on his tongue. "Don't worry, Captain. You're in good company," Araz chuckled, the sound rich with the kind of camaraderie that came from shared danger. "What now, Lieutenant? We've made our point. Time to decide what we do with it." Vex leaned back, the weight of command settling comfortably around his shoulders. "We play it smart, Captain. Keep them on their toes and use this to our advantage." "And the Empire?" Araz asked, the question loaded with implications. "They'll be back," Vex replied, his voice firm with the certainty of experience. "But next time they won't underestimate us." As the channel closed, Vex turned to his crew, each face a reflection of the journey they'd taken together. "Well done, everyone, but don't get too comfortable. This is just the beginning." Zala grinned, her expression one of gleeful anticipation. About time things got interesting. Interesting, Callan echoed, his tone one of satisfaction mixed with a scientist's curiosity. That's one way to put it. Vex allowed himself a rare moment of humor, the kind that came from knowing they'd succeeded against all odds. Let's see what surprises the universe throws at us next. And as they prepared for whatever lay ahead, Vex couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just in the victory, but in the knowledge that they'd face the darkness and come out the other side, a little wiser, a little stronger, and a lot more ready for the chaos to come. Vex Ulthar stared at the holographic display with a weary sort of admiration, the kind you reserve for a cat that just brought in a bird and expects praise instead of the broom. So, Callan, you've really pissed off the Empire this time. Callan leaned back, looking far too comfortable given their circumstances. Well, the Empire's been ignoring Earth for years. Consider this a wake-up call delivered with a side of screw you. Zala snorted from her console, keeping one eye on the readouts. I doubt they'll thank us for the favor. Probably not, Vex replied, scratching at the stubble on his chin, a nervous habit that had worn a permanent groove into his jawline. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't enjoying this a little. It was hard not to. Watching the mighty Empire flail like an appended beetle was a spectacle that warmed the cockles of even the coldest heart, which was convenient, considering Vex's heart was well on its way to being cryogenically preserved. Incoming message, Zala announced, her fingers dancing across the console. Looks like the Empire's finally ready to talk. Talk, Callan raised an eyebrow. Or issue threats dressed up as diplomacy. Same difference, Vex said, pressing a button on his console to open the channel. Let's hear what they have to say. The hologram flickered to life, revealing the face of an Empire official who looked like he'd been born in a suit and was still trying to grow into it. Empire command to unidentified vessel. Cease all hostile actions immediately or face the consequences. Consequences, Vex mused aloud, not bothering to mute the channel. Like being on the receiving end of a very strongly worded letter, Callan chuckled, crossing his arms. Or maybe they'll send us to our rooms without supper. The official's expression didn't change, though Vex liked to imagine there was a flicker of irritation in those steely eyes. This is your final warning. Stand down or be eliminated. Eliminated, Zala repeated, as if testing the word for flavor. Sounds like they're planning a lovely party. Vex leaned forward, giving the official his best nonchalant smile. Listen, we both know you're not going to blow us out of the sky, not with the mess we've just made of your systems. So why don't you tell us what the Empire really wants? There was a pause, the kind of dramatic silence that usually preceded something explosive. What do you want? The official finally asked, clearly untrained in the art of negotiation or humor. That's more like it, Vex said, glancing at Callan. We want to chat. Your systems are in chaos thanks to our friend here, and we'd like to see if there's a way to, work together. The official hesitated, and Vex could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. I will relay your request to my superiors. Please do, Vex replied, cutting the transmission before the poor man could protest, and tell them to bring snacks. Negotiations always go better with snacks. As the hologram faded, Vex turned his attention back to his crew, noting the mix of amusement and tension in their expressions. Well, that went better than expected. Not sure if you're a diplomat or just really good at winging it, Zala remarked, her fingers never pausing in their dance over the controls. Why not both? Callan suggested, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. The ship hummed around them, a comforting presence in the madness of the universe. Vex knew the clock was ticking, that the Empire would only tolerate their antics for so long before resorting to more traditional methods of persuasion, like lasers. Callan, Vex said, shifting gears, we need to talk about that nanotech. What's the real deal here? Callan's playful demeanor faded slightly, replaced with the seriousness of a man who knew he'd unleashed something both brilliant and terrifying. It's Earth's latest little gift to the galaxy. Self-learning, adaptive, and just a touch rebellious. Think of it as a teenager with the keys to a plasma cannon. Sounds charming, Zala said dryly. And you thought it was a good idea to let it loose on the Empire's systems. Better than sitting on a shelf collecting dust, Callan replied with a shrug. Besides, the Empire's been ignoring us for a long time. It was about time someone reminded them we're here. Vex nodded, though doubt gnawed at him like a rat at a particularly juicy wire. The Empire was vast, proud, and not above reminding everyone of it. They'd swatted Earth aside like a fly for decades, and now Callan's little science project had poked the bear. Hard, his thoughts were interrupted by a discreet chime from his console. Another message, this one marked confidential, the kind of label that practically begged to be opened. Looks like someone in the Empire wants a private chat, Vex said, eyeing the message with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Probably to ask where you get your hair cut, Zala quipped, or offer a bribe. Whatever it is, it's gotta be good, Callan added. Open it up, Vex. Vex did just that, leaning in as the message unfolded before him. The screen displayed a name he recognized with a jolt of surprise: Dr. Jerk Quill, an old acquaintance, or rather, an old rival turned unlikely ally in more than one bar fight. Dr. Quill. Vex read aloud, the name tasting like a shot of tequila at the end of a long day. The Empire's finest mind in technological warfare. Wonder what he wants. Revenge, Callan suggested. Or maybe he's just lonely, Zala added, her tone light but her gaze serious. Let's find out, Vex said, initiating a private channel. The screen flickered again, resolving into the form of Dr. Quill, looking as unkempt and harried as ever. Vex, Quill greeted, the single syllable loaded with too many memories to count. I should have known you'd be involved in this mess. Nice to see you too, Jerk, Vex replied, unable to keep the grin from his face. To what do I owe the pleasure? Quill sighed, a sound that spoke volumes. Listen, I'm not here to wax poetic. The Empire's in chaos thanks to your friend's nanotechnology, and it's my job to sort it out. Then why are you talking to me instead of fixing things? Vex asked, crossing his arms. Because I need your help, Quill admitted, the words tumbling out like they'd been dragged from him by force. The Empire's brass is panicking, and they're likely to do something stupid. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. A moment of silence passed, heavy with the weight of history and too many shared drinks. Vex considered his options, glancing at Callan, who nodded once, a barely perceptible gesture of agreement. The nanotech is different, Vex said carefully. It's not just a tool, it's a living thing. Adaptive, curious, and maybe a little too smart for its own good. What do you mean, living? Quill asked, skepticism writ large on his face. Callan, Vex prompted, deferring to the expert. Callan stepped forward, fingers tapping a rhythm on his console as he spoke. It's built to learn and evolve, Jerk. It's not just following orders, it's thinking, making decisions. Like a particularly cheeky AI that's decided it wants to be an artist. Quill rubbed his temples, frustration and intrigue battling for dominance. You're telling me the Empire's systems are being punked by a sentient program? Pretty much, Callan confirmed, looking decidedly pleased with himself. Isn't it beautiful? Quill groaned, a sound that was all too familiar to Vex. All right, I need more data. Can you get me access to your nanotech? Vex hesitated, the request hanging in the air like a sword dangling from a fraying thread. Trusting Quill meant trusting the Empire, and that was a gamble even more reckless than Callan's little science experiment. Vex, Quill said, his voice dropping to a quieter, more serious pitch. Help me out here. The Empire's not just going to sit on its hands. If this escalates, it won't just be their systems in trouble. Earth could end up paying the price. Vex sighed, the weight of the decision settling on him like a familiar but unwelcome cloak. Fine, I'll get you access, but this doesn't mean I trust the Empire. I'm doing this because I trust you, Jerk. Don't make me regret it. You won't, Quill promised, the sincerity in his voice a rare gem in a galaxy full of fool's gold. Great, Zala interjected, breaking the tension with her usual aplomb. So what do we do while the Empire's chewing on its own tail? We wait, Vex said, leaning back in his chair, though he knew rest would be elusive. And we'd be ready for whatever chaos comes next. The channel closed, leaving the crew of the ship to their thoughts. The universe, unpredictable and vast, swirled around them like a storm, each member of the crew a small, defiant piece holding its ground against the chaos. Here's to making friends in low places, Callan said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. And to not getting blown up, Zala added with a grin. Vex chuckled, a sound that was almost lost in the hum of the ship. And to the nanotech, our uninvited guest, may it continue to keep the Empire on its toes. As they settled into the uneasy calm before the next inevitable storm, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of something big, something that could change the balance of power in the universe itself. The universe had a peculiar way of timing its tragedies, and the Xenorian Empire wasn't about to be outdone by fate. The assault came fast, like a bad hangover after a night spent trying to outdrink a centauri. The ship's alarms blared, their shrill cries echoing through the metallic halls as Vex and his crew scrambled to stations. Incoming, Zala shouted, eyes locked on her screens, fingers dancing over controls with the precision of a pianist on performance night. Let me guess, Vex muttered, clutching the armrest of his chair, eyes narrowing at the holographic display that showed the Empire's fleet advancing like a swarm of angry hornets. They're not here to deliver the snacks they promised. Callan, ever the unflappable, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Maybe they just want to borrow some sugar, he deadpanned. Vex snorted, though the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. If by sugar you mean obliterate us, then sure, they're here for cup. The Empire was not messing around this time. They'd come to play hardball, and from the looks of it, they'd brought the entire league. The ships were sleek, deadly, bristling with more firepower than a weapons expo, a fireworks show that promised a finale of ashes. All systems online, Zala announced, her voice clipped but steady. And surprise, surprise, they're targeting our nanotech. Vex sighed, more resigned than surprised. They must have realized that threatening letters won't do the job. The bridge shook as the first volley of laser fire hit, the ship groaning under the assault. The deck tilted, sending Callan stumbling into a console. Well, he grunted, righting himself, that was a tad personal. Personal or not, we need to do something before they turn us into space flotsam, Zala snapped, her fingers a blur over the controls. Callan, now might be a good time to mention if you installed any secret tricks in that nanotech of yours, Vex prompted, not quite able to keep the edge of desperation out of his voice. Callan grimaced, a look that said he was about to reveal the sort of secret that left careers in tatters. There is one thing, he admitted after a moment's hesitation, but it's risky. Like playing poker with a loaded gun risky. Spit it out, Callan, Vex said, bracing as another volley rocked the ship. We're running low on options. Callan nodded, taking a deep breath. The nanotech has a feature I didn't mention. It can replicate, Vex blinked. Replicate, yup, duplicate itself using any available material. Turn a potato into a plasma grenade, if you will, Zala whistled low. And you didn't think this was worth mentioning before? Callan shrugged, a gesture that was either apologetic or reckless, probably both. Thought it might scare the newbies. Vex resisted the urge to throttle Callan and focused on the task at hand. Can you control it? Define control, Callan said with a wry grin. Enough to stop us from blowing ourselves up, Zala interjected. Callan hesitated, then nodded. I can set it loose on their systems. Might give us the edge we need. Do it, Vex ordered, no time for second guessing. We're past the point of polite negotiations. Callan got to work, fingers flying over his console as he unleashed the nanotech's replication protocol. Vex watched as the data streamed across his display, lines of code dancing like an untouched symphony of science. The Empire's great gleaming ships, so sure of themselves, had no idea what was about to hit them. Replication initiated, Callan announced, his voice tinged with satisfaction. We've just launched a self-replicating swarm of nanotech straight into their systems. And how long before they notice? Zala asked, her voice tight with anticipation. If we're lucky. Long enough for us to make a break for it, Callan replied, not quite meeting her eyes. Vex leaned forward, desperate for any sign of hope. Zala, tell me we're seeing something good happening. Zala's eyes flitted over her screens, the numbers and figures reflecting in her eyes like a digital storm. Their systems are glitching, she confirmed, voice edged with a cautious optimism. Looks like Callan's trick is giving them a real headache. Good, Vex said, though he knew better than to get too comfortable. The Empire was like a hydra, cut off one head and two more grew in its place, each more vicious than the last. The Empire's ships began to stagger, their formations breaking apart as chaos took hold. It was a beautiful sight, like watching a chandelier shatter in slow motion. Looks like they're having a bit of technical difficulty, Zala said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Courtesy of Earth's finest, Callan added, clearly pleased with himself. The moment of triumph was short-lived. The ship rocked again, this time more violently, as the Empire's remaining operational guns focused their fire. The hull groaned, alarms blaring like a chorus of doom. Damage report, Vex barked, his stomach twisting with uncertainty. Shields are holding barely, Zala replied, her fingers dancing over the console with frenetic energy. We can't take much more of this, Vex grimaced. For all of Callan's brilliance, they were still outnumbered and outgunned. The Empire wasn't going to retreat just because their systems were having a bad day. They doubled down, come at them with everything they had, like a gambler on a losing streak desperate for redemption. We need a way out, Vex said, his mind racing, eyes scanning the holographic display for an escape route that didn't end with them becoming stardust. Suggestions? How about we just ask them nicely? Callan offered with a grin that quickly faded under Vex's withering glare. Hyperdrive is an option, Zala suggested, her voice calm but urgent. But unless you've got a new planet in mind, we'd just be delaying the inevitable. We'll take it, Vex decided. Better a delayed demise than a swift one. Zala nodded, fingers flying as she prepared the jump. The ship shuddered under another impact, the lights flickering ominously. Coordinates locked, Zala announced. Brace yourselves, this might be a bumpy ride, Callan snorted. Bumpy, understatement of the century. The ship lurched forward, the stars stretching into long lines as they hurtled into hyperspace. The familiar sensation of being pulled in every direction at once hit Vex, a jarring but welcome reprieve from the onslaught they'd left behind. As the ship settled into the relative calm of hyperspace, Vex allowed himself a moment to breathe. The Empire was still out there, still hunting, but for now they had a moment of respite. Well, Callan said, breaking the silence, that was a fun little jaunt. Fun isn't the word I'd use, Zala retorted, her voice weary. We're not out of the woods yet. Never said we were, Callan replied, still grinning. But did you see the look on their faces when their systems started failing? Priceless. Vex shook his head, though a small part of him was grateful for Callan's irrepressible spirit. We've got to figure out our next move, he said, focusing on the task ahead. The Empire won't stop until they've wiped out every trace of the nanotech. Zala sighed, rubbing her temples. And we're the ones standing in their way. Not just standing, Callan corrected. Dancing, dodging, and occasionally moonwalking. Great, Vex said, though he couldn't quite muster the enthusiasm. We're the galaxy's court jesters. As the ship flew on through the vast emptiness of space, Vex felt the weight of what lay ahead. The Empire was relentless, powerful, and insultingly stubborn. They'd unleashed something spectacular with the nanotech, but spectacular was just another word for trouble in the Empire's dictionary. Zala, get me a systems check, Vex ordered, trying to regain some semblance of control. And Callan, start thinking of ways we can use that nanotech to our advantage. On it, Zala replied, already lost in her work. Thinking is what I do best, Callan said, tapping his temple with a finger. Vex leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a moment, letting the subtle hum of the ship envelop him. They were on the run, a tiny ship with a colossal problem, dancing through the cosmos on a wing and a prayer. But they were still here, still fighting, still standing, even if only by the skin of their teeth. Here's to making trouble, Vex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. And to getting away with it, Callan added, raising that imaginary glass once more. For now they had some breathing room. Tomorrow, or whatever passed for tomorrow in the black void of space, would bring new challenges, new threats, new reasons to wish they'd chosen safer professions. But for now they were alive, defying the odds in the Empire with every breath. And in this grim, endless galaxy, that was something worth fighting for. The Xenorian Empire had been the galaxy's bully for longer than Vex cared to remember, and being on the wrong end of their attention felt akin to poking a black hole with a stick. You didn't come back from it, not without a miracle, or at least a very creative escape plan. Vex Ulthar found himself in the ship's control room, his eyes glued to the holographic display that painted a vivid picture of their current predicament. Trapped in a cosmic dead end, the Empire's fleet looming like an unrelenting storm on the horizon. They had made a narrow escape into hyperspace, but their options were running thinner than a politician's promises. Look at those beauties, Callan remarked from his station, eyes glistening with mischief. You know, if they weren't trying to kill us, I'd ask for some pointers on ship design. Ship design. Zala shot back, her fingers a blur over her console. You planning on building one, or just painting targets on our hull? Callan shrugged, that infuriatingly carefree grin plastered on his face. Just thought it'd be fun to know what kind of scrap we'll be picking through once this is done. Vex resisted the urge to smack Callan upside the head. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, surviving long enough to figure out their next move. Callan, can you get the nanotech to do something useful? Like, I don't know, make the Empire's ships vanish. Callan echoed, snorting. Sure, let me just pull that out of my magic hat. Less sarcasm, more solutions, Vex replied, though he couldn't help but appreciate Callan's sense of humor. If you couldn't laugh in the face of imminent doom, when could you? Well, let's see, Callan mused, tapping his chin with a mock-serious expression. We've got the replication protocol working its magic, but I can tweak it. Turn it into something more disruptive. Disruptive, Zala raised an eyebrow. Care to elaborate? Callan leaned forward, eyes dancing with that mad scientist glint. We can program the nanotech to infiltrate their communication systems, turn their orderly fleet into a gaggle of headless chickens. It's risky, Vex warned, though he could see the potential. If they catch on to what we're doing, they'll come at us even harder, like they're not already. Zala interjected, her voice dry as desert sand. At this point, risky's all we've got. Guess we're going for the full house then, Vex decided, hoping this gamble wouldn't blow up in their faces, literally. Callan, let's make it happen. Callan cracked his knuckles and set to work, fingers dancing over his console like a concert pianist on an adrenaline rush. The ship hummed with an energy that was almost palpable, the nanotech's replication process ramping up in intensity. Vex felt a mix of dread and hope, a cocktail of contradictions that seemed to define their current existence. As the ship sailed through the vast, unfeeling void of space, Vex found himself pondering the cosmic joke that was their lives. Here they were, a ragtag crew on a half-battered ship, taking on the might of an empire that spanned star systems. It was the kind of story you'd tell over drinks, assuming you lived to see the end. Got it, Callan announced, triumph in his voice. The nanotech is in their systems, and it's doing its best impression of a gremlin on speed. Let's hope it's enough, Vex muttered, though he couldn't help but smile at the thought of the Empire's finest tearing their hair out as their systems went haywire. Think they'll invite us to their next fleet review? Zala quipped, her tone laced with sarcasm. Of course, Callan replied, grinning like a maniac. I'll even bring the drinks, Vex snorted, shaking his head. If we pull this off, drinks are on me. The ship continued its flight through hyperspace, the stars streaking by like a celestial blur. Despite the chaos, there was something comforting about the familiar hum of the engines, the steady rhythm that had carried them through thick and thin. It was a fragile comfort, but one they clung to in the face of overwhelming odds. Status update, Vex requested, needing to know exactly where they stood. Zala's fingers danced across her console, the screen lighting up with an array of data. Their communications are glitching. We've turned their network into a teenage drama, full of noise and impossible to follow. Good work, Vex remarked, relief mixing with the adrenaline. Now we just need to figure out our next move. We've got a small window, Callan stated, his expression turning serious for once. They'll fix their systems eventually, but for now they're shooting in the dark, aren't we all? Zala murmured, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 weary souls. Here's a thought, Callan said, leaning back in his chair, a glint in his eye. What if we use our little advantage to give them a taste of their own medicine? Vex arched a brow. You're suggesting we turn their weapons against them? Exactly. A little friendly fire to keep them on their toes. It's bold, Vex acknowledged, weighing the risks. And it might just work. Bold, more like suicidal, Zala interjected, though there was a hint of admiration in her voice. But at this point, what have we got to lose other than our lives? Callan quipped, a grin splitting his face. All right, Vex decided, the weight of command settling on his shoulders. Let's do it. Callan, see if you can hack their targeting systems. Zala, keep us flying straight. Consider it done, Callan replied, diving back into his work. Piece of cake, Zala added, though the tightness in her voice said otherwise. Vex took a deep breath, calming the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. They were riding the edge of a knife, teetering between utter disaster and unlikely victory. But as long as they were still in the fight, there was hope. Here's to the underdogs, Vex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. To the underdogs, Callan echoed, his voice carrying a rare note of sincerity. Time seemed to slow as the ship hurtled through the void, each second stretching into eternity. Vex felt every heartbeat, every breath, the anticipation coiling tighter with each passing moment. They were on the brink, not just of defeat, but of something greater, something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. We've got it, Callan announced, his voice cutting through the tension. Their targeting scrambled. We've got them hitting each other instead of us. Couldn't have happened to a nicer bunch, Zala commented, a rare smile playing on her lips. For a moment, just a moment, Vex allowed himself to revel in the victory. They turned the tables on the Empire, if only temporarily, and in the grand game of cosmic chess, that was a move worth savoring. But the moment passed, and with it came the sobering reality of their situation. The Empire wouldn't stay down for long. They'd regroup, recalibrate, and come back with a vengeance. And when they did, Vex and his crew would need to be ready. Zala, how long until we reach the next system? Vex asked, needing to focus on the immediate future. Few hours, give or take, Zala replied, her fingers never slowing. Assuming nothing else goes wrong, optimism from you, Callan teased, flashing a grin. Don't get used to it, she shot back, though her tone was devoid of heat. Vex leaned back in his chair, eyes closing for a moment as he considered their next steps. They'd scored a victory, but the war was far from over. The Empire was relentless, a juggernaut that wouldn't stop until they were ground to dust. But if there was one thing Vex had learned in his years of dodging, ducking, and diving through the galaxy, it was that even the mightiest foes had their Achilles heel, and sometimes all it took was a little creative thinking to find it. Callan, keep monitoring their systems. Let me know if anything changes. Will do, boss, Callan replied, already lost in a sea of data. And Zala, keep us on course. I don't want any surprises. You got it, Vex, she replied, her focus unwavering. With his orders given, Vex allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd done the impossible, turned the Empire's power against them, and in doing so, bought themselves a sliver of hope. It wasn't much, but in the dark reaches of space, sometimes a sliver was all you needed. The ship continued its flight through hyperspace, the stars a distant memory, their destination a beacon of uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, Vex felt something he'd thought lost, a sense of purpose, of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Here's to making our own luck, Vex whispered, a small smile tugging at his lips. To making trouble, Callan echoed, his voice carrying the weight of their shared journey. Zala said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. They were a crew of misfits, outcasts in a galaxy that valued conformity over creativity, obedience over independence. But together they'd forged something more, a bond that transcended circumstance, that laughed in the face of danger and dared to dream of the impossible. And in the vast, unfeeling expanse of space, that was a victory in its own right. The ship hummed like an overworked toaster, ready to either make breakfast or set the kitchen on fire. The latter seemed more likely today. Vex Ulthar stood at the helm, staring at the mess on the holographic display, a chaotic dance of red blips that represented the Empire's fleet, now a testament to Callan's mad genius and their own desperate gamble. Looks like we've turned their orderly breach into a mosh pit, Vex muttered, scratching his chin. Guess they didn't expect a little nanotechnological mischief from the backwater Earthlings. Callan grinned like a kid who'd just pulled the best prank in the universe. They wanted a symphony, but we gave them a rock concert instead, more like a rock slide, Zala added, her fingers weaving through the console's interface like a cat playing with yarn. That's a lot of very expensive ships smashing into each other. Think they'll send us a bill? Vex asked, deadpan. If they do, we'll just add it to Callan's tab, Zala shot back, as she manipulated the ship's trajectory with the deftness of a seasoned pilot. What's a few trillion credits between friends? Vex chuckled, though the humor barely masked the tension coiling in his stomach. The Empire's armada was reeling, but it wouldn't last. Still, they'd bought themselves precious time, a few hours at best before the Empire's tech wizards unscrambled their systems and came hunting with a vengeance. Callan, how's our gremlin doing? Vex asked, knowing full well the answer was probably not great. Nothing ever was. Still wreaking havoc, Callan replied, eyes fixed on his screen. But we've got a problem. Their tech might be slow, but it's catching up. They're patching the holes, of course they are, Zala sighed, tapping in new commands to adjust their flight path toward the next system. Because life couldn't possibly be that easy. Lucky for us, life's got a sick sense of humor, Vex said, leaning back in his chair. We need to up the ante before they get their act together. Callan nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. I'm already working on it. Gonna hit him where it hurts. Their central command's gotta be drowning in chaos right now. We just need to give it a little nudge, like tipping a cow, Zala suggested, grinning despite the absurdity of the metaphor. Yep, but the cow is a billion-dollar command ship, and the field is made of explosives, Callan replied with a wink. That makes more sense than it should, Vex admitted, rubbing his temples as he considered their options. Okay, let's keep them off balance while you work your magic. Zala, get us closer to their lead ship. Callan, be ready to pull the trigger. The ship surged forward through the blackness, fueled by desperation and adrenaline. It was the kind of insanity that made for great stories, assuming anyone lived to tell them. As they approached the massive hulk of the Empire's command vessel, Vex couldn't help but marvel at its sheer size. It loomed like a mountain in the void, bristling with weaponry and arrogance. The heart of their adversary, the brain of an empire that had ignored Earth for decades, now outmaneuvered by a ragtag crew of rebels with nothing but a handful of nanotech and a lot of nerve. Remind me why we're doing this again, Zala asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Because we can, Vex replied. And because it's either outsmart them or get vaporized. Ah yes, the ultimate motivator, Callan chimed in, immediate disintegration. The ship shuddered as Zala brought them into range, the Empire's defenses lighting up the display with warnings that screamed danger in all known languages. Ready when you are, Callan said, eyes locked on his screen. Just say the word, Vex ordered, exhaling slowly. Let's give them a show. Callan's fingers danced over the console, executing the final sequence to unleash the nanotech's full fury. It would infiltrate the Empire's systems like a swarm of angry bees, turning their advanced technology against them with a precision that bordered on art. The command ship systems blinked erratically, lights flickering as if caught in a storm. From their vantage point, Vex and his crew watched as confusion turned into chaos, the Empire's mighty vessel flailing like a beached whale. Look at him go, Zala whispered, awestruck by the spectacle. They're eating themselves alive. Nothing like a self-inflicted wound, Vex said, unable to suppress a grin. Let's hope it's enough to make them reconsider their life choices. But even as the Empire's command ship faltered, the rest of the fleet began to regroup. It seemed that the powers that be weren't completely incompetent after all. Here they come, Vex announced, as the remaining ships closed in, eyes narrowing at the inevitable confrontation. Time to see just how pissed off they are. Pretty pissed, I'd imagine, Callan replied, his hands never leaving the controls. Luckily, we're already public enemy number one. Good to know we're making friends, Zala remarked, steadying the ship as they braced for impact. The void erupted with blinding light and searing heat, the Empire's firepower a relentless barrage that threatened to swallow them whole. But Vex's crew was nothing if not resourceful. They danced through the storm, their ship weaving between blasts with the grace of a drunk trying not to spill his drink. Hold together, you bucket of bolts, Vex whispered, urging the ship onward as enemy fire streaked past them. Next time we pick a fight with an Empire, remind me to bring a bigger gun, Callan quipped, his voice tight with concentration. Noted, Vex replied, steering them toward the fray with a determination born of desperation. They had to survive, had to prove that even the smallest force could challenge the mightiest Titan. Status, Vex barked, his adrenaline surging as the battle raged on. Shields are holding, barely, Zala reported. And Callan's nanotech is still in their systems, doing its thing good. Keep us moving. We need to stay unpredictable. The ship twisted and turned, avoiding the worst of the Empire's wrath, but Vex knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, their luck would run out. Callan, any more tricks up your sleeve? Vex asked, his mind racing for solutions. Just one, Callan replied, a glint of mischief in his eye. They're about to get hit with a lovely cluster glitch. Should give them something to think about. Do it, Vex ordered, trusting in Callan's ingenuity. With a flick of his wrist, Callan unleashed a final barrage of nanotech mayhem, targeting the Empire's fleet with a precision that defied logic. Systems shorted, weapons misfired, and ships veered wildly off course. It was chaos, pure and simple, and it was beautiful. "They're falling apart," Zala observed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "We might just pull this off, might," Vex agreed, though he didn't dare let hope take root just yet. But we're not out of the woods. The Empire's ships were in disarray, their once cohesive force now a scattered mess of confusion and infighting. It was an opportunity too good to pass up, and Vex was determined to seize it. "Let's make our move," Vex declared, steering them toward the heart of the chaos. "Time to finish what we started." They plunged into the fray, their ship skimming the edge of disaster with every maneuver. It was reckless, borderline suicidal, but it was also their best shot at survival. The Empire's flagship loomed ahead, its defenses crippled by the nanotech assault. Vex could see the panic in their ranks, the fear of an enemy they couldn't understand, let alone control. "Callan, Zala, get ready," Vex ordered, the weight of command pressing down like a stone. "This is it. We take them down or we go down swinging." "Ready as I'll ever be," Zala replied, her hands steady on the controls. "Let's make some noise," Callan added, grinning like a madman. With a final, desperate push, they charged the flagship, their ship cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter. The Empire's defenses crumbled, their once imposing presence reduced to a shadow of its former glory. "Direct hit," Zala shouted, her voice triumphant. "We've got them." The flagship shuddered under the assault, its systems failing one by one as the nanotech wormed its way through every circuit, every connection. It was over and they had won. The Empire's forces began to retreat, their once mighty fleet now a scattered remnant of its former self. It was a victory, hard-fought and well-earned, but Vex knew it was only the beginning. "We did it," Callan breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We actually did it." "Don't sound so surprised," Vex replied, though he couldn't help but share in the sense of wonder. "We're Earthlings, remember. We thrive on the impossible." As the ship sailed through the wreckage of the Empire's fleet, Vex allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had done the unthinkable, turned the tide against an overwhelming force, and in doing so they had changed the galaxy forever. "Here's to making our own luck," Vex whispered, a small smile tugging at his lips. "To making trouble," Callan echoed, his voice carrying the weight of their shared journey. And as they sailed into the uncertain future, Vex knew that they would face many more challenges, many more battles. But they would face them together, as a crew of misfits who had dared to dream of the impossible and against all odds had made it a reality. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would they. The Xenorian front lines were quiet now, eerily so, like the calm after a particularly vicious storm. The kind of calm that made you wonder what was lurking beneath the surface, ready to bite you in the ass the moment you got comfortable. But for now, it was just a void, black and empty, with nobody around to shoot at them, a rare luxury. Lieutenant Vex Ulthar stood on the bridge of their patched-up ship, looking out at the quiet darkness, feeling the weight of what they'd just pulled off. It was the kind of victory that didn't just defy the odds, it laughed in their face and kicked them in the shins for good measure. Callan, the resident tech wizard and purveyor of nanotechnological mayhem, appeared beside him, his expression a mix of disbelief and smug satisfaction. "So we actually did it," he said, breaking the silence. "We're not just space dust floating around in a Xenorian petri dish." "Not yet," Vex replied with a wry grin, "though I wouldn't put it past the universe to decide it was all just a big misunderstanding and blow us up anyway." Callan chuckled, shaking his head. "You know, for a guy who just took down an Empire's flagship, you sure know how to keep the optimism in check." "Optimism's for people who haven't met the Xenorians," Vex shot back, crossing his arms. "But I'll admit, if there's one thing Earthlings are good at, it's making life hell for uptight space tyrants." Callan nodded, a glint of mischief returning to his eyes. "And here I thought my degree in creative destruction would never pay off." The ship hummed softly around them, a gentle reminder that even victory came with a price. They'd survived, but survival was just the beginning. They had to make sure they stayed that way. "And the nanotech?" Vex asked, turning his attention to the expansive holographic display that showed a chaotic mosaic of static where the Empire's fleet had once been. Callan waved a hand dismissively, still doing its thing. "We taught it well: learn, adapt, disrupt. Pretty sure they're going to be picking up the pieces for a while." "Good," Vex nodded, running a hand through his perpetually unruly hair. "With any luck, it'll keep them busy long enough for us to figure out just what the hell Plan B is." "Don't tell me you're not a fan of Plan A, the one where we wing it and hope for the best?" Callan asked, feigning innocence. Vex smirked. "I've found winging it usually ends with someone missing a wing. Preferably not mine." Their conversation was interrupted as Zala, their pilot and the ship's second-in-command, poked her head into the control room. "You two done patting yourselves on the back? We've got wounded to look after, and someone needs to make sure this rust bucket doesn't fall apart." Right, because nothing says victory like patching up bullet holes, Callan quipped, standing up straighter. Zala rolled her eyes. Don't get too comfortable. We've still got a galaxy full of pissed-off Xenorians who'd love to turn us into space debris. Comfortable? Vex echoed, shaking his head. I'm not sure I even remember what that feels like. Zala chuckled darkly. Well, maybe after this, you'll get a refresher. If the universe is feeling particularly generous, they moved through the ship, weaving between crew members who were tending to various tasks, repairing the hull, tending to the wounded, and generally trying to hold back the encroaching tide of chaos. It was a hive of activity, but instead of the usual frantic desperation, there was a thread of something else, hope. However small, however fragile, it was there, and that was something. Vex paused in the med bay, watching as the ship's medic worked tirelessly to patch up their injured. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and burnt circuits, a reminder of just how close they'd come to losing it all. How's it going? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Dr. Joran looked up, her hands stained with the blood of their crew. As well as can be expected when you take on an empire with a ship held together by duct tape and good intentions. Good intentions, Vex repeated, smirking. That's generous, she snorted, turning back to her patient. Just try to keep us in one piece for a little while longer, okay? My vacation days are all used up. Noted, Vex said, nodding. I'll see what I can do. He left the med bay, his thoughts churning with the enormity of what they'd accomplished. A part of him wondered if any of it would make a difference in the long run. The Empire was still out there, still massive and powerful, and they were just one small ship with a big mouth. But then again, sometimes that's all you needed. He found himself back on the bridge, staring out at the quiet void. It was strange being here in the silence, knowing what they'd done. They'd faced the impossible and somehow come out the other side. But that didn't mean the fight was over. It just meant they had a chance to keep fighting. Callan joined him again, leaning casually against the console. So, what's next, fearless leader? World domination, galactic peace. Maybe a nap. Who knew taking down an empire would leave us with so many options? Vex replied, smirking. But first we need to figure out where we stand. The Empire's not going to just roll over and play dead. Callan shrugged, a glimmer of humor in his eyes. Well, they might if we ask them nicely. Vex laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. Somehow I doubt that. Yes, you're probably right, Callan conceded. But whatever happens, we made our mark. Our little corner of the galaxy knows we're not just going to lie down and take it. True enough, Vex agreed, a flicker of pride warming his chest. We might not win every battle, but at least we're fighting. Callan clapped him on the shoulder. Well, here's to making life difficult for overly bureaucratic space tyrants. I'll drink to that, Vex said with a grin. As they shared a moment of camaraderie, the ship continued its steady journey through the void, a lone vessel in a sea of uncertainty. It was a tenuous piece, one that could shatter at any moment, but for now it was enough. In the end, they'd done what they set out to do. They'd challenged the status quo, shown the galaxy that Earthlings weren't just going to sit by and let the universe walk all over them. They'd taken on the Empire with nothing more than determination, cleverness, and a whole lot of attitude, and they'd come out on top, at least for now. But even as the ship sailed on, Vex knew that their journey was far from over. There were still battles to fight, still enemies to face, still a galaxy to change, and they would face it all together as a crew who dared to defy the odds and laugh in the face of danger. Because if there was one thing they knew for sure, it was that they were stronger together, and they wouldn't back down, not now, not ever, because sometimes making your own luck was just the beginning.